Ladies and gentlemen, can we all agree on the fact that cheating is bad? Cheating in school, cheating in sports, and obviously cheating in chess. While it does provide us with some fun content, you really shouldn't do it. And recently the chess world has been hit with a bit of a cheating scandal. Cheating in air quotes, cheating insinuations, however you want to call them, but we are yet to get to the bottom of the evidence, and we will see what is coming in the future. But did you know that in 1998, chess cheating was legal for several matches at the highest level? Yes, they made an event known as advanced chess, and some of the world's best players were allowed to play against each other using opening databases with millions of games to reference things that happened in the past, as well as the best chess engines at the time. In 1996, Garry Kasparov, who was the world champion, played against Deep Blue. That was the first time it was man versus machine. But these matches, advanced chess, were man and machine. And in this video, I'm going to take you through the 6 games that were played in the very first edition of this in León, Spain, between Garry Kasparov and Veselin Topalov. Topalov, one of the best players of his generation and of many, many, many years. Yeah, it made for some very interesting theater, if you will. Topalov was using chess base 7, and Kasparov was using Fritz 5. Now, for some of the games, they were only allowed to use the engine. For some of the other games, they were allowed to also use the database. Regardless, this is a fascinating and really weird concept. And we'll talk a little bit more about when everything is over, but in game number 1, we had a very theoretical opening. This is known as the Sveshnikov Sicilian. Think about this. This is 1998. This opening was played in the 90s, in the 80s. It was pioneered by none other than Yevgeny Sveshnikov. And in 2022 here, 30 years later, we're still playing all of these lines. Knight db5, d6, white plays bishop g5. Now, I'm going to fast forward through all of these moves because the insane thing about this position has been reached probably about 50,000 times, 60,000 times online over the board, all right? Black here can castle or play the move bishop g5. Bishop g5 was played by Kasparov, knight c2, castles, a4. Everything until this position had been reached many times prior. In fact, up until this point was reached prior as well. It took 17 moves by both players, aka 34 moves total, for the first new move to be played, which is the move queen to d3. Now keep in mind, they are literally cheating. Both of them are actively, in air quotes, cheating, legally. Back then, actually, engines could be influenced by humans. You ever been in a group in like school? Those are the worst, unless you get a really good group or you're with your friends, but if you're with your friends, you don't get any work done, right? So in groups, you have like a dominant person, the type A person. Sometimes that's a good leader, sometimes that leader is really horrible, right? So engines are one of these things you can't like fully trust. So here Kasparov goes on a little kingside initiative, right? Topalov plays f3. In Sveshnikov's, the engine really likes attacking white over here. White tries to use the fact that black has very split pawns to negate the attack and then proceed to win the pawns and win the endgame. Bishop h6. My Stockfish doesn't like that move very much, but my Stockfish is 24 years older than these engines, right? So it's like cyborgs from a different generation. Here comes the black queen, knight e3, rook f6, and you'll notice that white is sort of just defending the king. White is like preemptively expecting the attack to arrive. Black is still preparing the attack. The problem is after knight d5, and this kind of transformation, black no longer has the attack, and white is able to take that pawn. And I told you a long time ago, if white is able to clean up here, white's just going to be winning. Black plays bishop back to e6. Probably would have been better to be a little bit more active. We have bishop back to e6, knight e3 consolidating, and we grab the pawn back, but now comes c4. My Stockfish evaluates this position as 0.4 for white, which is hardly better, but chances, okay? Rook c8 played, rook c1 defense. Rook c8 might have even been too passive. Rook f2 here is preferred by modern engine, trying to solve the problems aggressively. But back then, you know, it looks a bit more human to play rook c8, rook b7, and keep in mind you're not using the engine every move, but you're using it enough of the moves. The problem with the way black plays this is that black is actually unable to win the pawn on c4. Like all of these moves, rook c8, and look at black's rook, right? Like you put everything here, you can't even take it. Why? Knight d5. If bishop takes, you take the rook. If rook a4, you have a fork of all three of black's pieces, so that just doesn't work at all. If you move the rook anywhere else, I have knight b6 anyway. And believe it or not, it was in the endgame that Kasparov and Fritz V faltered and gave Topalov this pass c-pawn, ultimately landing a resignation after 43 moves. So a very, very nice game by Topalov slash chessbase 7. Topalov was using chessbase. He wasn't using Fritz. Did I say Fritz? So a very convincing first win. Now, the amazing thing is, a couple of months prior to that, Kasparov had defeated Topalov in a rapid match 4-0. And a year later, he played his best game of all time, arguably, against Topalov. It's called Garry Kasparov's Immortal Game, right? So how is Kasparov going to react when he gets the white pieces? Well, we have a King's Indian defense by black, but then c6, d5. So it's actually kind of a Grunfeld, Slav. And this position, white has the lead in development, so white doesn't want to get total symmetry with castle's knight c6. White plays knight e5 and immediately starts kind of trying to jump on black before black is able to consolidate. So we have f4, very nice idea. The point is that if knight takes e5, you're going to take in the center. Both are okay. I think actually this one's better to build just a giant shield and then go here. So we have knight c6. And this position had been reached in the database before, with black playing moves like knight b6. But the engine here for Topalov, I imagine, suggests the move f5, which looks completely insane. Why would you allow the knight back to e5? Well, because you want to go here, and after b3, you want to go bishop d7. The computer doesn't actually fully throw out the move f5. In fact, right now, on a low depth, my Stockfish thinks that f5 is a very reasonable move, but after knight e5, it doesn't like knight b6. It wants black to go secure this square, or that square. So it doesn't hate the move f5, but it hates the follow-up. 24 years later, Stockfish would obliterate, I mean, it would literally banish the engine of 1998 to the Shadow Realm. All right, so we have queen d3. And by the way, for a second game in a row, the novelty of the position, aka the move that up until that moment had never been played before, is the move queen d3. So, fun fact, knight c8 back. And, well, here's that shield against the dark-squared bishop that I was telling you about. How on earth is white going to break through? White is better, but how is white going to break through? Modern Stockfish wants g5 from black. It wants black to get aggressive. It wants black to take, put the knight here, maybe h5, h4 in the future. Computers nowadays solve things forcefully. But back then, if you were just going to kind of sit around and let the opponent improve their position, you were going to run out of moves. Engines were actually quite bad at creating counterplay, and Topalov is doing his best, but he simply has less active pieces than white. White has 5 active pieces. Look at the black pieces. They're all paralyzed on the back rank. All right, knight c5, a4, queen c3, slow improvement, bishop b5, and that's it. I mean, just total paralysis. h6 is not good. b6 should have been played here, but you really don't want to allow the queen in like this. But yeah, the black engine nowadays is actually unafraid and wants to sacrifice like this and try to win the b-pawn. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Black just played a little bit too passively, and look at this beautiful queen sacrifice from Kasparov. Gets in, b6. Black has no moves. Rook c7 is on the way, and Topalov resigned. It is now an even match, tied 1-1. All right, so let's go to game number 3. Notice how both sides have won with the white pieces. Okay, so this time, a different second move from Kasparov. We have a Najdorf. All right, we have a main line. This is English attack has been played so many times. g4. Nowadays, instead of knight bd7, a lot of games also go h5, preventing white from playing the move g4 completely. h5 is an ultra-theoretical move. Knight bd7. And there's also lines where black will play b5 right away. But black just chooses to castle and delay the move b5 for a very long time. Like, when I say very long time, I mean he doesn't play it, period. Doesn't play it for a very long time. Bishop d8, defending, h4. Modern Stockfish hates this position for black. If you notice, modern Stockfish is just like, yeah, it's +1, this is garbage. But it's just growing and growing. Unfortunately, games don't really end when the evaluation is +1, right? So Topalov got this very, very nice position and then was like, all right, I'm going to move my rook over here and probably just checkmate black, right? So here comes knight d4. Now, Kasparov here plays a very Sicilian-esque sacrifice. Rook takes c3, that kind of a sacrifice. Rook for knight on c3 when the king is castled queenside is very popular in many positions. Knight a4, rook g3, bishop a5, And ultimately, we get to an endgame where actually black has the advantage. And you say, well, how did that happen? Well, it seems like Topalov misevaluated the position here and should have absolutely not allowed this sacrifice. So now, after knight d4, the best move according to the engine is in fact rook c3. So it is very interesting why Topalov still allowed knight d4. Like, my engine does not say that's the move at all, you know? Maybe in this game, the players were, maybe these were the two games where let me actually double check. The players could consult the built-in Million Games database only for the third and fourth game. Okay, well that's kind of weird. I guess maybe for this game they weren't using the engines. I think that's what it says. I think it says that for this game they were only using the opening database. For the other games they were actually using the engines. So yeah, Gary ends up playing the top move of Stockfish 2022, even though he's not using the engine for this game, gets a really strong bit of counterplay, and ultimately lands himself in a position where he's up a pawn. Now, the reason why this endgame could be a draw is because the bishops are of opposite color. So dark and light squared bishop, if you traded the rooks off right now, it would just end in a draw. That's just the way opposite colored bishops go. Black did have some winning chances here, but Topalov walked his king over and ultimately defended against the pawns. And Kasparov tried his best, but there was nothing to be done. I'm gonna kind of show you. Yeah, there's not much you can do here. White's pawns are all on light squares. They're untouchable by the bishop. So the black bishop, I should say. So the players made a draw, but a very convincing game from Gary, who ultimately landed this rook takes c3 sacrifice. The computer might have some questions and problems with the Najdorf, at least in the 90s, but Gary Kasparov playing the Najdorf with the black pieces was a savage, and he instilled fear in his opponents, okay? Now, game number 4. Kasparov has the white pieces, okay? d4, and we have c4 played, bishop g7, and this time black plays c5, so Gary once again going for a fianchetto system. Notice how black just immediately smashing the center, knight c5, knight c6, but white is stable. White is okay. There's nothing crazy here. Now, that might look like it just straight up loses a pawn, by the way. Like, let's say knight d4 and then knight d4 once again. Yes, it does lose a pawn, but after knight d5, black can now not castle. And if black plays e6, asking this knight to leave, there is this absolutely incredible move, bishop h6, which is just disgusting. And the point is that if you take, I'm going to take on d4, and now you can't move at all. If you play rook f8, you will never castle. If you take this, I'm actually just straight up mating you in the center of the board. Like, you didn't see that coming at all, okay? Like Ngannou Overeem, uppercut from hell. You know what I mean? Like that, there's just no... So instead of that, what happens is black's queen is dancing in the center of the board. You take on c4, here comes knight back to c3. Is the black queen trapped? Black queen almost has no moves. Okay, now you're rook b8. Knight b6 attacking the queen. Is this queen lit? Oh my goodness, what is going on? b4 on the way. Bishop d2, rook c1 on the way. What an absurd position. How did Topalov get his queen stuck in the center of the board like this after 15 moves? I guess that's what happened when your queen comes out, right? Queen d6, rook b1. He doesn't want to lose his rook. Okay, is he going to trade? Hitting the queen again. Now, knight c7, there would have been queen c4. Okay, so e4. And finally, the queen is met. Folks, how many queen moves has that been? Black has played 21 moves, and I feel like half of them have been with the queen. What is going on? And the engine is unrelenting. The engine once again shoves the queen backwards. All right, f4. And now all of black's pieces are getting pushed around. Gary plus an engine is gross. Now, I think here something could have even been improved. I think the computer prefers, rather than getting taken, it likes take, and then f4. This is the way it prefers to play. It doesn't like putting the pawn on d5. It thinks that this kind of a position is better, because if something like bishop e6, you always walk into f5 in the future. So, but that doesn't happen. Instead, we get this, and actually, black is okay. But here comes g4. Just when you thought the attack was over, here comes g4. This knight comes back. White is avoiding all exchanges. White has space, right? But suddenly, here comes Topalov, bishop b5. And modern Stockfish is like, what the hell is going on? What is going on? Something in White's position went totally wrong. Like, White played a bunch of good moves and is just worse. But he keeps attacking. f5. I don't know about this move, e5. That looks like a sus move. Here comes f5, okay? Takes. a4. Takes. Oh man, black's piece is really not looking too good here. I think what was basically underestimated by black was the position after e5, f5. And engines are generally very bad at anticipating attacks. And when you allow white to shut the center like this and play f5, only bad things are going to happen in the future. Only bad things. And so what happens in the future is, here comes the rotation, the rotation, the rotation. Suddenly, look at the eval. The eval is 0, but only if black plays top engine moves, right? Top engine move. But notice the eval is creeping up. You know why? Because the computer misses rook takes h7. Computers are really bad at spotting tactics and fatal sequences for themselves. If you go back to this position, the engine evaluates this position as relatively balanced. You go here, it still evaluates it as relatively balanced. It thinks that this is the best move. You go here, it still thinks it's equal. And then it goes, oh, shit, like slow motion, you know? And even 24 years ago, that was happening. So, kaboom. Garry Kasparov does not need a second invitation to the party, and he absolutely bludgeons the black king. Queen h7 is on the way. If you go here, you go that way. I'm not going queen h7, I'm going bishop h7. You say, what? Queen is hanging. So everything went wrong in this game for Topalov after the move e5. So when you want to attack a player, you want to close the center completely. Black completely shut the position. Okay, now e takes d5 would have also not probably been a good move, but it would have actually been better than what happened in the game because black would have had activity, the knight would have targeted something, but when he closed the door entirely like this, I think Kasparov immediately knew he was winning. Like, if one day I'm going to ask Garry, after the move f5, do you think white is winning? He'd be like, I think only white can win the game. Well, he might say something else. He might also, you know, ask me why I haven't paid him for that interaction. I don't know, all right? He might ask me what he's doing there. So it went from bad to worse, and it ended with a beautiful sacrifice of a rook and a devastating attack. So Garry leads 2.5 to 1.5. All right? Game 5. Thus far, white has won every game. Will Topalov continue this tradition? All right, we have yet a Najdorf. We have another Najdorf Sicilian. All right, queen d2, bishop e7. There. Oh, this time h6. So last time there was no h6. b5. So this time Kasparov plays h6, b5. Now, if these two were just playing in human terms, anytime you get Kasparov on the board in a Najdorf, you're like, all right, how is Garry going to get this job done? But in this case, you have engines, right? So bishop takes b6 is a fascinating move, planting the knight here. And we get this position where black is a little bit passive with the bishops, but white has this comfortable outpost on a5. b4, the knight goes to c6, and black is a pawn up. But white doesn't have to take this pawn. Actually, modern-day computer prefers this position. It really likes this position for white, where it just plants the bishop on d5 and says, so what's up? Like Nate Diaz, you know? And black really struggles to move. For example, if black castles, g5 is crushing. g6 is on the way, so is gh6. And you cannot open the h-file because you would die. You would just literally die. So this absolutely fascinating modern idea not to take the pawn, but to go boop, boop, and just plant the bishop on d5 is just incredible. Just absolutely amazing. Of course, I should just say it's way too dangerous for black to take all these pawns. g5, rook f1 is just going to be on the way. So queen b4, though, allows Kasparov to get his king ultimately to safety. Here's the thing, though. In doing that, he's going to lose a pawn, right? And now queen c4. The difference in being down a pawn in endgames, especially opposite-colored bishop ones, is, well, more material benefits the side, right? That's up a pawn. But also, it comes down to future weaknesses. Other pawns all over the board that could be potentially targeted. So, e4 and bishop d3, and here comes h5. Not only is Topalov up a pawn, he's also creating an attack. But unlike you guys, he would not blunder a checkmate in one move from a better position. Man, imagine getting 19.5 minutes into this video and getting roasted. I'm sorry. I'm actually very sick. I don't know if you can tell if I'm speaking differently, but ever since I got back from my trip recently, a whole nose, sinuses, headache, you know. It's not COVID. I tested negative, but also I feel like getting COVID in late 2022 would be extremely impressive. But yeah, I figured I would still make this video for you guys, so You're 20 minutes in, you know, you're getting a little breaking of the fourth wall here. Hard work. Rook e7, bishop e4, and Topalov is going to try to win this endgame. It's not easy. All right, despite being 2 pawns up, black has a lot of activity and really makes it tough for white to move. So how would the engine and Garry Kasparov possibly screw this up? The king goes running. The king is running. The king is running. Is it a draw? No. Black's bishop is stuck. Queen takes a2. Nice and timely queen trade. Now the bishop's got to go, and that pawn's going to fall. Opposite colored bishop endgames are drawn, but not when it's 2 pawns and not when the white king is so active. And look at this. He doesn't push his pawns. He gets his king closer, puts his bishop on a very active square, and it's going to ultimately be the threat of this. And so, for example, if the king walks over, black cannot just play f6, because what'll happen is white will now walk over here and win the rest of the pawns. White is just simply going to be up too many pawns. So rather than even getting involved in all that, it goes here, and Garry resigns. That is now 4 wins for the white pieces. Okay? 4 wins for the white pieces. Incredible stuff. Last game. Will Kasparov put the match away? All right, they have traded blows. It is 2.5, 2.5. Garry has the white pieces for one last hurrah. This time we have whatever this is, right? We're about to have a Benoni. Garry chooses once again a Catalan-esque or a G3, whatever you would call this, anti-Benoni. Knight d4. And yeah, I mean, Topalov was playing really exotic openings the entire match, it felt like. But he also was bringing his queen out early. And it really felt like Garry was punishing that. Here's another example. The queen is just stuck in the center. Look at this. Black is getting pushed around, but here black actually can claim the fact that he's not so much worse. His position looks completely absurd, but white can't really do a whole lot, and he's down a pawn. Knight e4, right? Okay, you're going to go to d6. Black can't really go b6, because then the move knight d2 would attack that and that. That would result in a material loss. Knight c6. Put the knight here. And then what happens is you get this. I mean, this just looks atrocious for black in terms of movement. But black is a pawn up. See, if black wasn't a pawn up, this wouldn't be so bad. And what does the engine do when it's sometimes faced with an existential crisis after something like b4, which is an incredible idea? Well, sometimes it just chooses to repeat moves. Queen a5, rook a4, queen e5, and the players shuffle back and forth, and that ultimately ends the game. What? That's all we got? That was the final game? Well, the top computer line here is queen e5, rook e4, queen f5, rook f4, and in this position, queen h7. Modern day Stockfish is trying to say that rather than repeating moves, black should put the queen on h7 and suck it up. After that, it says something like knight b5, bishop b7, and rook to a4. But actually, it completely thinks that black is fine. Maybe it needs a little bit more time to be convinced otherwise with moves like knight d4. But yeah, the engine actually just thinks that black is better here. But who knows? Maybe if we dug a little bit further, it would end up disagreeing. But it's pretty fascinating that back then, after Kasparov plays this move b4 sacrificing, the engine was actually hesitant. It decided to repeat rather than going down over here and just hanging on to the 2 pawns, which is fascinating. I guess this is not a move that you would play against Kasparov. You wouldn't trust something like queen h7, and maybe even in the modern era, players wouldn't trust something like queen h7, right? It just seems so counterintuitive, but the engine is a scumbag, as always. What have we learned? Well, they repeated moves, and the match ended 3-3. There were other matches, though, played, like Anand played Karpov, and actually, Vishwanathan Anand was the most successful advanced chess player of all time. I think he won 3 matches at the highest level. So, yeah, this was a really fascinating era where cheating was legal at the highest level. Like, you were allowed to use the machine. Now, how could we apply this in modern times? Well, you probably shouldn't. But Ludwig did something recently where the players could see the eval bar. Now, if you could see the eval bar as a top player, you would probably immediately figure out what's good and what's bad. For noobs, it really helps, right? If you see as a noob that it's +5, you're going to start looking for tactics. It's going to train your brain to look for tactics. The problem is, otherwise you won't know when it's +5. Now, could we introduce something at top tournaments like a lifeline? You know, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You get a lifeline. You can check what the evaluation is, you know? Or you can see the top 2 lines of, you know, the top line of the computer. Or, I don't know, the third line of, I don't know. But would it be cool? I don't know. How much better would it make modern players? I don't know, probably about 100, 150 points. But it was fascinating that in 1998, top players could play alongside computers, because right now, it ain't that. Right now, computers are so much better than humans, it's scary. Anyway, hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know if there's any other historical ones that you want me to cover, and I'll see you in the next video. Get out of here.